Hospitality MD listeners. Welcome back to another episode. On today's episode, we are privileged to welcome Sarah Dandashy to the show. Based in Los Angeles, Sarah has leveraged her 15 years of frontline experience in luxury hotels as an award winning Lake Door concierge to establish herself as a leading voice in hospitality and travel. As the founder of Ask a Concierge, she goes beyond the concierge desk to give back to the hospitality industry by providing insights on travel trends and news uncovered by her interactions with guests and travel leaders from all over the world. When she's not serving the industry through social media and her podcast, Say Yes to Travel, she also consults and advises some of the country's top travel organizations to maximize their hospitality. Sarah, thank you for being with us on Hospitality MD.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So for everybody who's listening, I just want to kind of give a shout out to Rupesh Patel. He was lucky enough to, well, I was lucky enough, I should say, to be on his show where I met Sarah, where she does the Hospitality Minute every week
Mhm.
at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time on Hospitality Live with Rupesh. So it was really a pleasure meeting you on his show, and I'm glad we could connect in this capacity. So I want to start by asking you because you've been doing this for a long time, and I know you have an acting background, and you've kind of been doing, kind of a hodgepodge of different things throughout your career. Um,
Wow, you did some deep digging right there.
a little bit. I wanted to make sure that we do you justice by having you on the show because you are such a leading voice. We want to make sure that we're maybe interviewing you a little bit different than you have in the past.
Sure.
So I want to start by asking you if you can remember the first moment that you felt hospitality. If
Oh,
you dig back, or the most maybe profound moment, if you can think of it, because I think that'll set the tone for the rest of your career.
the first one I felt hospitality, like as a hospitality provider or okay.
So, yeah, just whatever story comes to mind, you can
Okay.
interpret that for yourself.
Okay,
Doesn't
yeah,
have
yeah.
to be personal.
I have two. I have two stories. So the one is because I can never just choose one. Go figure. A true hospitality professional always have to give you plenty of options. No, but
Right.
the first time I will say was so my very first hotel job. I started at 19 years old working at the Four Seasons in Washington D.C. in Georgetown, and I have to say going through that and feeling going through that training set the tone for my career. I mean, because think about it, I started at 19, so I didn't have any like bad habits to break. I had no habits. I was completely moldable. And, they had a really beautiful training program. And I remember just sitting there actually in the conference room that they had us in, kind of going through the training and like the things that we had to keep in mind when we were providing service, and everything from if they're walking down the hall, a guest is walking down the hallway, that you step to the side, and there were just these little nuggets that I was like, oh wow, like the nuances to really how you can deliver hospitality are so special. And I was very lucky that I was introduced to that very early on in my career. So I have very specific memories of being there. Like I even like could even like smell the conference room, because it was obviously all wood and very luxurious. And then also even like noticing all the branding, like wow, it was a very special moment that it's like wow, they have their own letterhead and their pens, now things that we take for granted, but like when you're 19 years old, it's very impressive. And then another moment that I will say, probably back in 2015, I was at a conference in Cabo in Mexico, and I've seen this since, but at the time it was still new to me. I had gone to visit the one and only Palmilla, and I remember walking through the property, just doing like a sort of a site visit, and every single uh, employee or somebody that worked at the property that I interacted with, they all put their hand on their like on their heart or their chest area and like did like a little bow. And that to me was like, wow. It just that was hospitality from the heart. And it was so special. And it's such a slight gesture, but it made me feel really warm. And that was a little thing. So there you go. Two stories to set the tone.
Definitely. I love your Four Seasons story, first and foremost, because it was that your first time being in that kind of luxury environment. Like as a kid, did you stay at Four Seasons? Did you stay at luxury hotels? Did you travel at all? Like,
Oh, we
you
got to
know,
go back. We'll go back.
right.
We'll go back. So I did travel quite a bit as a kid. So even though, despite the blonde hair, blue eyes, I am half Lebanese. So half of my family lives in the Middle East as well as Europe. I do happen to have some extended family members that do work in hospitality. So being in that sort of luxury environment was not foreign to me. I had certainly experienced it maybe as a guest, but also as a kid too. Like, what do you don't really know? But I had traveled quite a bit. I mean, my first flight, I think I was 3 weeks old as soon as my passport came in, and we flew from New York over to Saudi Arabia. So I lived as a kid in Saudi Arabia, London, Atlanta, college in DC, lived in New York a bit, and then certainly have been in Los Angeles the past several years. So um, travel and hospitality has always been sort of a part of my upbringing. But that time, so even though it wasn't my first time necessarily being in that luxury environment, it was my first time almost feeling a sense of responsibility for that luxury, that luxury hospitality. It was like, wow, I'm being invited into this space to help be the fabric of what makes, at that point, the Four Seasons, which is its luxury hospitality. So it was very much an honor, and I was very eager to pick up on all the nuances so that I could really, deliver it accordingly.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because when you're a part of an organization like that, that responsibility, I think that was a great choice of words because you feel like, oh, it's on me now. Like all these things that they're talking about, it doesn't do any good if we just train, but it has to be acted each and every time, every single guest,
Come
consistent.
from within too, and all of that, all of the above, exactly.
And right to your point on that, because and even about your story with the hand over your heart, because that's a when you see that so consistently, obviously it's being trained and ingrained into all the staff members. And where do you draw the line between like scripted and kind of trained and ingrained gestures of hospitality versus that kind of raw and authentic um, human to human hospitality that can happen anywhere
I, you
in
know,
the hotel environment?
no, that's a great question, and it's something that I've been delving into and kind of like figuring out my how best to sort of describe it myself. But because we're also seeing a shift in what travelers want. So we are seeing, and in the essence, that travelers don't want that overly scripted language. It feels false to them. They're like, yeah, yeah, we get it. You have to say my pleasure. Okay. So
Hmm.
right now we are seeing a lot of these bigger brands veer a little bit away from that. Yes, there is a sense of, it has to be scripted. You might have to say a guest name a number of times within a certain exchange. But even Forbes, by the way, Forbes Travel Guide, they've even modified some of their requirements as well to reflect what luxury travelers are wanting. And they want it to be a little bit more, whether it's just authentic. The way I think, I'd almost feel like the way that I would describe it is because there needs to be, a sense of, proper use of language and presentation. You can't just be, hey, yo, man, how's it going? Like that's, and, even though you
Sure.
might be able to connect with somebody that way, it's like that's not exactly what it is because you do have to keep in mind the brand that you're representing as well, too. Every interaction, I always say you are not only representing yourself, you're representing the hotel, but then you're also representing your profession. And so if you're really looking to stay, relevant and on people's minds, every interaction does count and matter. So, that being said, it's almost like, yeah, I guess like some people use the term like your Sunday best, it's like when you're trying to figure out like how would you describe what you would wear in your Sunday best, which is not formal, but it's not casual. Or one could even maybe say like, oh, how would you speak maybe to like your grandparents? And I know that sounds really weird, but there is a bit of, you might choose your words a little bit more carefully. You might speak a little bit more deliberately. And I think if you do that, then you're still able to have a genuine connection, but just maybe not so scripted to always say, it's my pleasure, sir, or, whatever the other
Yeah,
phrasing.
yeah, because I haven't had the opportunity to stay at very many luxury properties, being a mid-level hotel manager, right? But
Mhm.
I stayed at the Waldorf Astoria in Chicago,
Oh,
and
beautiful.
I when I pulled up um, to their courtyard area, I and was kind of attacked by doormen who were opening my doors and everything. Uh, Meanwhile, I was staying on an employee rate, which maybe had part of a Hilton employee rate, which may have had something to do with my guilt that I felt for receiving so much aggressive uh, kind of invasion of hospitality. But I
Oh,
almost
wow.
felt uncomfortable to a certain extent because I was like, this is just like almost outrageous to a certain extent, and it kind of made me feel a little bit,
Well,
off
it's
put a little bit.
interesting because it all depends on what the guest is used to. And so that's why it's extremely important in hospitality to read the guests. Some guests do not want all the fuss. Some, they're like, this is why I'm here. Lavish me and like say my name 25 million times a day, so it's picking up on kind of what the guest wants. Um, but next time you go, indulge yourself a little bit. It's kind of nice.
Yeah, you know what? Maybe I should try it sometime. I actually found myself responding a lot better to um, the Park Hyatt brand when I had an opportunity to stay there. I think their like slogan is luxury is personal, and
Yeah.
I kind of connect with that a little bit, and I experienced that in action when I stayed there, because my check-in process, I felt like I was making a personal connection, and it was a very pleasant conversation, but I also felt like the person I was speaking to was polished, refined,
Yeah.
professional on stage, but more, it was approachable, but it was still luxurious. And that interaction actually prompted me to indulge myself more than I did at the Waldorf Astoria.
Mhm.
Um, the Waldorf, after that arrival experience, I literally was like, I'm just going to sneak around the hotel and try and remain under the radar, because honestly, it made me uncomfortable. But at the
Yeah.
Park Hyatt, I was like, you know what? Let me check out their concierge desk. Let me check out their food and beverage offerings, because I was like, I want to experience more of this. So I agree with you. I think there's a certain sense of responsibility, again, to use that word, to be refined and be on stage, but also to read the guest, respond to cues, the
Well,
basics.
and you bring up a very great point. Both of those brands are fantastic brands, and they're certainly known for, excellent service, but they do, as you clearly just described, have a very different flavor. So that being said, when we talk about hospitality, there is no one size fits all because even for example, like Waldorf Astoria, that has a different sensibility than say a Four Seasons, which has a different sensibility than a peninsula, which has a different sensibility than a Ritz Carlton. There might be more overlap because those are certainly all within the same sort of comp set, but each one just feels a little different, and it's that also then leads people to choose the brands that they're loyal to as well too. It's like where do they feel more comfortable? Some like, hey, I want to stay at a W hotel because I like feeling funky and groovy, like whatever, whenever, okay, so um, I think that those nuances, it is important to acknowledge, but and as a hospitality provider, understand sort of the umbrella that the brand that you're working for has sort of created, because they are so very different, yet similar, but different.
Right. And I think it's safe to say that you've kind of mastered that, having worked for Four Seasons, Peninsula, the London, having worked at all these different luxury brands. Um, I'm sure you've experienced from the provider standpoint how, again, nuanced it is
Mhm.
from brand to brand. So for
100%.
you, how do you manage the brand kind of modifying your delivery from brand to brand, but also like you have your own personal brand as well. You're a leading global concierge. I mean, you're Sarah Dandashy. How do you maintain that while working for these different brands and kind of being a chameleon, so to speak?
Well, so to give to just some clarity to that, all of those were properties that I had worked for at like a specific time. So it's not like one day I'm here and the other day I'm working at another one, putting on like a name tag and that. So, they were all very much, um, they were properties that I worked at for several years, multiple years. A lot of it is taking my knowledge and what I know and then really going in with an open mind to when I do get trained on those at those properties because generally speaking they do have the human resources department do have a pretty thorough training uh procedure so that it immediately gives you a sense and flavor of what they're looking for. Then that combined with easily over the first like 2 to 3 months, really gauging the average sort of clientele that comes in. So, case in point, for example, I had gone more recently from Peninsula in Beverly Hills to then the London, West Hollywood. And I mean, all intents and purposes, Peninsula's 5 star, 5 diamond. The London, although luxurious, would be a solid 4 star sort of experience. And it's different. They wanted very different things. They're so I could my training because it was more formal was definitely helpful, but the guests needed me to be more relaxed. It would be a little bit too much pomp and circumstance. They'd be like, "Yo, what's going on with this girl?" So it's taking whatever previous training that you've had, but then being very mindful that you will have to adjust and go, move accordingly. So, it's just kind of like, adapting and that combination of seeing what their guidelines are as well as what the guests are responding to.
Yeah, because I mean, to go back to your acting background, right? It almost sounds like to you're when you go to a different property and you're learning it, it's almost like you're preparing for a new role, so to
Yeah,
speak. Like,
yeah.
and kind of to draw that line when you're on stage in hospitality, you kind of almost have to play the role of, okay, yesterday I was a 5 star, 5 diamond concierge in Beverly Hills and it's catering to this guest. Now, what would a concierge at a solid 4 star upscale property with this clientele respond to? Do you think about it that way ever at all? Um,
No, well, I mean, at the beginning, sure, at the beginning there was definite. I actually, what I mean, the things that I remember loving about going from such a heavy 5 star background, because prior to the Peninsula, I had worked at the L'Hermitage, also in Beverly Hills, which was a Raffles and a Fairmont, and then certainly Four Seasons before that. So definitely under all of these umbrellas. But I remember at the London that I was like, oh wow, I can be a little bit more of myself, and so I didn't, then they weren't scripted. In fact, they were like very much like push your own personality. I felt that I fared better than maybe some of the others because I had such a strong training. So I felt like I knew that my training would rein me in, but then I still felt like I had all this wiggle room. Whereas when I worked at some of the other properties, it was very rigid in how I could respond or interact. So for me, I enjoyed it because I'm like, oh, I know my foundation is at a high level, and now I can just kind of play within that. Where I would then see other colleagues who maybe this was their first hotel. And because they weren't given parameters, it was like, I'm like, you said what to them? It was so loosey goosey. So there is something to be said for it's nice to keep it, personal, but there absolutely has to be strong training grounds so that when you are bringing people into the fold, so to speak, that they know the parameters in which to play with. I mean, I remember somebody being like, "Oh yeah, John in 508," and I'm like, please don't tell me you called him by his first name. Like, John? No. What? So it's again, it's understanding, the parameters in which to play. But that's why, and every single hotel brand, no matter what it is, that onboarding process is so important because whoever is working, whether it is at a concierge desk or the front desk or in the restaurant, the bar area, the cocktail servers, the housekeepers, the engineering, anybody that might end up interacting with a guest, it is extremely important for them to understand the the flavor, for a lack of a better word, of that brand and that property, and so that they're able to accurately um you kind of reflect that. Like, for example, even I was so trained in like yes, 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 that I was over promising things. And then my shortly after I started, my manager came over and he was like, "You told them that like whatever valet was, you could comp their valet." And I'm like, dude, like if we need to sign off and comp their valet just to like get them to chill out, like, yeah, right. We just say yes. It's like a half day. And he's like, well, it's technically a third party and this and that. And I'm like, oh, okay, whoa, this is like such a whole different ball game. So where I knew that at some of these 5-star, 5 diamond properties, it was just like, yes, and then you figure it out later.
Mhm.
This was very much like you had to be very aware and not over promise. But that goes within line of the brand.
I like you being vulnerable and saying that because, like, I think on for a lot of people listening, think, "Oh, Sarah Dandashy," because at this point in your career, you had already had
Yeah, yeah.
10 plus years of concierge experience. You had already been well on your journey of your own personal brand as a concierge. So, you know, for people to know that even at that level, your manager still came up to you and told you, "Hey, you need to chill out on this," or you still had to adapt and almost relearn some things. Um, I think is humbling. I think for maybe a lot of people listening to know that.
I mean, here's the thing. First of all, thank you for even saying that. But for me, it's like when I step into that, like that's the role that I play, and it's not, you come with all your years of background and your experience, and I think that that really works well, especially when it's like resolving conflicts or things like that, because you can stay very cool and calm because most likely you've seen it before, so you're like, we know how this is going to play out. But at the end of the day, it's a constant. It's a constant learning process. Why? Brands are changing, guests are changing. There was definitely a period of time where it was like the idea that you would text a guest was like, oh my gosh, I hope I don't get in trouble for texting a guest because that might be too personal. Now they're all like, please don't send me a piece of paper with my confirmation. Will you just text me that I have my 8 o'clock reservation at wherever? So the guests, what they want is different. And so then you just have to, you always have to adapt to that. And every interaction is different. Maybe somebody takes something that you say completely the wrong way. And then you're like, oh my gosh, wow, I didn't even think that it could have been interpreted that way. It's so, every day is just so changing that I don't think that you can go into it with like a set of blinders and it's like, oh, I know I have this and whatever. At the end of the day, also, it's the service industry. The guest really doesn't care who the heck I am and what I've done for the past 15 years. They just want to know that is it getting done?
Right.
And if there is a personal connection and then they do find out more and then they do care, cool. But at the end of the day, ego, experience, all of that behind you. And I mean, I've even heard some people say you're as great as your last guest interaction. I think that's a little excessive to say. It's a little, but there is a sense of validity to that. Is that you are as good as your last interaction. So stay on your toes.
That's the first time I've heard that, and I think I agree with you. Yeah, it's a little bit like, all right, that's a little bit over the top, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, like you have to be on your game. You have to be consistent. So you've been doing Ask a Concierge for what, almost 9 years now, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So And your most recent hotel job ended a couple months ago, right, with the pandemic?
Oh, okay. You want to get in on the details. Yeah. So
Well,
no, I'm happy to share because I actually have not been very vocal on it, and I'll explain why. In full transparency, over the past year or so, I really had been only working part-time hours as my brand had grown so much. To give you an idea of 2019 for me, I traveled to 35 different destinations. I was working with different brands, whether it was cruise lines, hotels, filming road trips, vineyards, whatever. Um, Going to Southeast Asia, coming back, I would literally it wasn't uncommon for me to land at LAX at like 10 a.m., come home, freshen up a little bit, put on my uniform, my name tag, and be at work by 2:30. I'm crazy. Okay. I
that's
but for
fantastic.
me it was like out of respect for the hotel that I have been working at, they have been with me through this entire journey, and they've let me grow and blossom independently. And it's like they scratch my back, I scratch theirs, and they've been very open about that. We've both been very open about that since the beginning. So I even though I personally had a bit of like a plan to ultimately part ways this year, just wanting to make sure I'm like, okay, is it time? Then the pandemic hit. So then I was furloughed. And, but the hotel stayed open the whole time. And at a certain point, they were like, okay, well, we want to start bringing back the concierge. Obviously, being a senior and in charge of the department, I'd be the first call. So there were a series of calls where they asked me to come back. And I said, thank you for calling me first. I respectfully would like to defer and please start bringing back the next person on the list and the next person on the list. So they ended up bringing back two. And then come the end of August, they were like, we can't keep an additional person on furlough anymore. We want you to come back. Please come back. But if you
Right.
do come back, we are going to have to let go of one of the people that's already been here working for the past 3 weeks. And I was like, absolutely not. No way. No way. Because I couldn't take away a job away from somebody at this point in first of all ever, but definitely at this point in time. And it's very different taking a job away from somebody versus earning a job. So and it just felt I couldn't do it. So that kind of happened, and then I happened to be working with some brands in Mexico. And when I came back, that was one of the reasons why I wanted to go back and be with family, to just kind of like regroup and process, because it was one of these moments that I had been working towards this moment for so long, to be like, okay, I'm cutting ties, maybe next chapter. And but it was such a sad circumstance. It was such a sad circumstance. And it was something that I didn't feel comfortable sharing, um, because it involved so many people
Yeah.
and the livelihood. And it's like, yay for next chapters, but not under these circumstances. So that is the full story.
Yeah.
That I haven't officially, like, I haven't like written it out or shared it anywhere. But um, yeah, so it's been this sort of bittersweet, uh, fully stepping into the next chapter.
Right. And I think as many people are doing, I found it interesting that despite your growth with your own personal brand, you maintained rooted in a
Yeah.
line level concierge position, working PM shifts at that, which I respect a lot,
Oh, I
having
far prefer
worked
PM.
with a lot
Whatever.
of people. What's that?
I was like, I far prefer PM shifts, but that's because I would wake up. So I wake up super early as it is, and I would have my full day. So I would have my full morning day, that I would devote to building out Ask a Concierge. And then I would just go in the evenings and go to the hotel. So it was kind of like, um, it worked best for me because I could focus on building my passion, when I was freshest. Because you know that if it was flipped the other way, you get off of work and you're like, I don't want to do any work right now. I don't, what? We all know that. You don't want to do anything after a shift. So I figure I end the day with it. I leave the shift and I go straight to bed.
Yeah, and it's for me at least, and I think for maybe a lot of people who follow your content, there's a certain level of authenticity that's associated with being grounded in your roots and kind of, your insights are coming from hitting the marble every day, so to speak, and being in the
Yeah.
lobby, and you know, not leaving that behind at the first sign of success with your, because I feel like for some people, oh, I was on the Kelly Clarkson show, I was on this news network, I was doing this. All right, well, you know what? Peace. I'm out. I'm too big for it now. But you stayed true to your roots. Why? Why is that?
um, Great question. That was it was something that I struggled with for a while because I mean, in theory, I could have absolutely left my job, a while ago, but it was twofold. It was, with threefold, I would even say. On one side, I created this brand, Ask a Concierge, and yeah, could I, it felt I was struggling with, is it still authentic to be Ask a Concierge if I'm not at a hotel? Because that's where it started. Yes, you can argue that it's like you can be a private concierge and this, and I do private concierge work. So it's not a complete departure, but I had to be okay with that. The other aspect is I'm very heavily involved um, in the Lake Leador organization. And I, was worried about what would that be like, my involvement with that if I wasn't working at the desk. But third, uh, it was my family, and I think that's also been a little bit of what I've been struggling with even more recently is that, and I'm sure a lot of people that, either furloughed or even getting laid off, yes, there's certainly like the financial aspect of it, but I think that there's also a huge thing is that it's your family, your work family. It gives you this sense you're rooted, like, the high fives that you have with so and so, the laughs in the back that you have with whatever, like you miss that. And by the way, I mean, all of this was, you might have left on good terms. This is clearly circumstances beyond everybody's control, but you miss that. And especially for hospitality professionals, I mean, they're not glamorous hours. We miss holidays, we miss weekends, we work early mornings, we work in the middle, we work, it's not a normal lifestyle. And who can you really best bond with but other people that get that not normal lifestyle? So anytime that you kind of part ways with that, it's a little jarring.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just as you were saying that, now I'm starting to like play back the reel in my head of like all the fun memories that are kind of associated with being in a hotel environment. It's almost an irreplaceable
Hmm.
um, feeling,
Yeah.
that you have. So kind of as you move and you develop your brand, do you think you'll ever go back to a hotel? Does that even seem possible at this point in time?
Oh, you were
Have you
asking
thought about
all.
it?
Wow. And by the way, as like authentic and open as I am, there's a lot of things that I don't totally touch on,
Sure.
but I'm happy to share because you're asking it. I mean, in all honesty, I don't. It doesn't necessarily make sense for me at this point in my career to going back to maybe being a line concierge. That, let's be honest, it doesn't make sense. Um, but I do foresee my involvement with hotels changing. Absolutely, working with them in a consulting capacity because it is certainly that um, the guest interactions and that embodying that hospitality was so much a part of my life. And then certainly in the content creating space as well too, because that's something that is interesting because it's a little bit of a natural extension of being a concierge. What did we do as concierge? I always argue that the concierge were like the original influencers, because think about it, they're the ones that are like, hey, come check out this place, or whether it's a restaurant or a store, or they're the ones that are curating and figuring out the best of the best to share that information with their guests, which is in essence what like a you know real influencers should be doing as well too. So there's something that I almost feel like is a bit of a natural extension of being a concierge, but just doing it not behind the confines of a desk. Now I get to help uh, a lot of people have amazing experiences, whether they're just doing a staycation in their city or they're traveling somewhere.
That really like totally opened my eyes. I love that sentiment because you're not leaving. You're not.
Yeah, it just
You're
evolving.
still a concierge. You're able to do it, and influence again more people than the people who just call you on the phone at the hotel or come up to your desk. Um, and yeah, that sentiment on the influencers, like who do restaurants call to come over for free and try their tasting menu out and stuff like that? Who gets to go on boat tours and architecture things for free and do that so they can share it? A concierge. And now, in your role, who gets to travel and get exposed to that in order to share it? You're really doing the same thing. So it, the just because you're not at a hotel, I think it's clear that your passion authenticity speaks for itself, um, and that your role is now much bigger and much more influential. Another thing, you're writing a book? Pardon?
Ah, I am. Oh my gosh,
So
I
why don't we talk about that? I'm very interested to know. In my more recent not working at a hotel days, I've been finding myself reading quite a bit.
am.
So I'm interested to know. I'm sure as are many people about what you're working at.
Okay, okay. It makes it so much more real, but I am, and I'm just about halfway through it as well to have so yeah, it is going to be called Hospitality from Within, and it will be very much of a hospitality book, and just breaking down different key points of hospitality, be it reminders, something new, new ways of looking at things, um and sharing some stories from not only myself but from also different colleagues as well too, because I think, as with anything in hospitality, you never work in a silo, you're always working with other people. So I think it wouldn't do the book any justice to just have my stories, but to have other stories, because so many people have amazing interactions. So yes, I am working on that, and if all goes as planned, should have that out probably in December.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm so excited for you, and I'll definitely be getting a copy of your book when it comes out.
Yay.
And that's another thing I actually, on your sentiment of, you know, you're missing the people that you've worked with and everything. On your podcast, I noticed you've been really reaching out to your friends and colleagues and kind of inviting them to your party a little bit to keep those connections strong,
Totally.
keep motivating your people regardless if you still work with them. And I see you doing that same thing with the book. So it's your generous spirit continues to play out in your ventures, and I think that will serve you well, and you keep doing that. It's awesome to see somebody giving back to the hospitality community, especially right now.
Well, I mean, it's the community that like raised me. You know what I mean? It's like it's where we're a pack, and depending on how much people know, but for example, the concierge community is so it's so interconnected that even within that world, I just had a concierge friend of mine call me from Barcelona just moments before we hopped on this call. I have After this call, I'm talking to a concierge in San Diego, and it's there is this camaraderie, and it's this friendship, and a lot of these people, these friendships have been furthered from my involvement in Lake Clador, which is the Gold Keys of Concierge. But that organization, if you're active in it, it's so enriching, not only in your database and your knowledge of people, but just it takes a special type of person to not only work in hospitality, but to work as a concierge at a luxury property. It's a very specific type of person. So you feel like you've found your tribe by being able to be there and make friends with others at other properties.
Well, for any members of your tribe who may be listening, do you have any message for them right now? Especially with all going on and a lot of properties obviously being hesitant to bring back a non-revenue generating role necessarily, in their hotel. And what's your message for your people? and for the community out there?
Well, first of all, I will say this. When it is a misnomer that the concierge profession is non-generating revenue. So there are absolutely ways that they can generate revenue for hotels, whether it is, driving traffic to the spa, to the restaurant, also the personal relationships that they end up developing with guests. The number of times that not only myself, but countless of concierge that I know of that they have guests that come up to them and they're like, "You're the only reason why I come back," because it's the personal connection. So being a non, I would very strongly argue that the concierge profession is not a non-revenue generating role. It certainly is. It's just a little bit more unique, and they are kind of the liaison between the city as well. So that being said, I would definitely strongly tell my tribe is to remind your hotel of that and the value that you do bring. And it's, you know a true concierge, there's a little bit more of a finesse that they have than, and don't get me wrong, the front desk is amazing, but it's like, a hotel really does itself a disservice if they're just going to have um a front desk agent try and do concierge work if they're not groomed the right way, in the sense that, not to say that they can't get there, but if they've never been trained and they don't know what they're doing, I would hear front desk agents be like, "Yeah, go get tacos like at so and so down the street," and you're like, "Oh, oh, that's where we get tacos, like after we've been drinking all night long. You can't send the guests there. What do So, but it's like understanding the nuances of picking up on what would suit that guest and then giving them recommendations accordingly. You need somebody that has that, whether it's the combination of the emotional intelligence, but the finesse and understanding how to read people, and that you can talk to them about a private jet or taking the bus down the street, like that can finesse that and really make them feel welcome no matter what. So, I digressed on all that entire topic. I do apologize, but it is something that I do feel very strongly about. And it's, um, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's every interaction is your chance to make yourself relevant. And this would go really for any position, but it is, it again, it's not only a reflection of you, it's not only a reflection of the hotel, but it's a reflection of the profession. So if you want job security, you just have to make sure that you consistently knock it out of the park, whatever you do.
That's great. And for the record, I completely agree with you on the revenue generation aspect of concierge.
Oh,
I
sure.
think the problem is ownership is hesitant to sometimes see that
Totally.
part through, which I love your advice. I think to be able to confidently remind your management and ownership team that the concierge is a vital role in the hotel industry, especially now as you know people try and navigate what's open, what's closed, where can I do, what can I go
Totally.
here. It's not as simple as Google anymore. I think it's actually probably brought the concierge to a different level of relevance than it
Totally.
has been previously.
And I don't get me wrong, it's, I don't have my head in the sand. I totally get, like, right now times are very different, and it's like, okay, when you have to consider, okay, how many people can you have working, and what's the reality if you have the hotels that's at 15%, how much usage will you get out of the concierge? So, I get it. It's tough times. Like, if we could go back to how we were before, we would, but it's like, how do you navigate that process? But I am even seeing some hotels that are like, okay, we'll bring back the concierge and then we'll train them how to check in people. So,
Right.
there are different ways to look at it. And it is a tricky time. And every property is so different that, it's a tough decision for any of these hotel owners, and management staff to make. So, but the best thing is to just, like, bring your A game always.
Yeah, definitely well said. Well, Sarah, it's been a pleasure having you on Hospitality MD. I think our viewers will get a lot of value from our conversation. Now, for those listening who want to find Sarah, you're Ask a Concierge everywhere, right? That's how we can find you on all social media
I
platforms,
am, I
correct?
am. So yeah, you've got my website, which is askaconcierge.tv, but then I'm on social media as far as Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube as Ask a Concierge. And then LinkedIn, I am myself, Sarah Dandashy. So there's that too.
Awesome. And we will include links to her profiles in today's show notes. Um, Sarah, thank you so much again for being on the show, and even more so, thank you for your contributions to hospitality. It's truly been a pleasure chatting with you.
Likewise, thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure. And by the way, I haven't forgotten, you're going to be on my show next.
Yes, everybody check out Say Yes to Travel, her podcast, where I will be a guest at some point here in the future.
We'll get back to you on it. Our people will talk.
Awesome.